how do we know if rage is just our soul being like, I want to actually speak my truth now? Or, hey, I came from a lineage of women that have an expression and are angry about something that is coming through me. Is there a way to know the difference between that?
I'd love to add another layer to that.
Yeah, please.
Particularly for us as women, which is not all women on the planet, but a lot of women on the planet actually have a voice now. And so those generations before us weren't able to express it, weren't able to say no, weren't able to speak their inner truth. They had to be quiet, be nice, be pretty, let's just box it in. And so this is what I mean by the collective moment that's happening. It's so multifaceted and I think unprecedented as well.
Yes.
And that's what I noticed with this image I kept seeing when it was happening to me of my grandmother. She had dementia, it was classic dementia right at the end of her life. And she was yelling and screaming and upset. And I was experiencing the same feelings at nighttime. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
And I think this is like the privilege of who we are right now, that we actually, there are ways for us to express it and begin to talk about it. Whereas previous generations, you just couldn't. And so, it's like when I used to teach workshops, right? I still do now. But I remember the first retreat that I did, and I texted my friend because it was here in Glastonbury, and there was, between a couple of women, some sisterhood stuff came out. And I'd never experienced it this intensely before. And I texted my friend Alia and said, I'm really upset. I'm like, what have I missed? How have I not held the space right? And she said, by any chance, do you have more support than you've ever had before? And I said, yes. And she said, the more supported and safe people feel, the more stuff will come up and rise to the surface because the container is there. And that's what I think is happening right now collectively.
Oh, so you just answered something for me, because I have also been looking at cultural trends and asking myself, like the Okinawa women. We look at these women with such respect because they have, Okinawa has some of the most centenarians compared to any other place on the planet. And most of those centenarians are women. And when I've dove into what do they do to get to that, so many of them get to 100. And one of the things that they do is they create moais. And moais is a gathering of women where we share resources. So as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking, I am seeing these gatherings of women and in a time like we've never seen before. And I'm also seeing the rage in women come out in a time in which we have never seen before. And you just explained that. When you feel supported, then there is a safety in which for that rage to come out. But yet we live in a culture that doesn't like our women to be angry. So is there an appropriate way to express rage?
So good. Dancing is my favorite way.
Excellent.
Moving your body in whatever way that you want to. I've done a lot of screaming into pillows. I've also started doing practices in my groups where we collectively release it. Because sometimes we're releasing stuff that is not just ours,
Right.
Or maybe it is as well. But it's way more than that as well. So using your voice, and I know that, maybe don't do it in your house without telling anyone.
Yes.
But you can go out somewhere in nature, for example. I used to do this with a friend of mine, my friend Amy Firth. She used to be my podcast producer, actually. I went to university with her. And she really has been, she does the work of the feminine like me. We've always been big feelers. When we were in our 20s in London, we were definitely tapped into that feminine rage, I think, like growing up. I think it's connected as well with that adolescent rage. I think it exists in different hormonal times in our lives. What we used to do, oh my God, I don't know why we did this. There were two things that we would do, and it was when we were drunk. Sometimes, I think this is why a lot of us drink and stuff. Yeah, it filters, but it also allows us to express things that we box in. And so we used to, when we would be walking home through the streets of London, I don't know why we decided to say this, but we would literally, I wrote it in my second book, Rise Sister Rise, we'd walk down the street and she would yell out, I'm a whore. I'm a whore, basically.
Right,
and then I would cack up laughing, and then it'd be like, you go. And I would say it too. It was really, it had nothing to do with what we were actually doing, but it was all to do with this wild woman power that was within us that had nowhere to be expressed in our lives.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And we would do another thing. When my friend Blair passed, he passed very suddenly and we were grief-stricken. Just like, you know, how could this happen to someone so young? And again, it was when we were drinking because it just let us do it. And together with our other housemate, Jackie, we would call it, I now know the cultural practice of my ancestry is keening, where you would grieve together openly. And so we would do it, and we'd just call it wailing, and we would sound the sounds in our body and then like laugh so much because it was just ridiculous what we were doing. But our body had the memory that that's what we were meant to be doing. We needed to drink to give ourselves permission to do it.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And then now I've been on this journey of unpacking these ancestral indigenous traditions that are from my ancestry that were definitely not passed down. And we all have them. And I think that deep down we do know how to take the lid off. And I think it's why a lot of us drink as a society.
Yeah. Because it is really, it's sad. And you know, there's a real interesting movement right now to everybody is like, stop drinking. And I feel like we need more context to that conversation. And part of that needs to be, especially for the perimenopause, menopausal woman, I the more I study this, the more I am convinced that the drinking, the anger, the crying, all of that is because you are shedding an old version of yourself and you're in confusion. And there's a new version that's coming out. And so now society has been like, and you don't drink. Yeah. And I'm not advocating that people drink, but I think there needs to be, like, I would love to take every 40-year-old woman and just be like, you're about to go on a journey you've never experienced before. And it's really a journey back to yourself. And it's going to have a lot of highs and lows. But if you stick with the process of it, you're going to love who you become. On the other side of that. It's really it's so interesting. And I think, you know, I've got an example regarding alcohol on the other side. I drink, my husband doesn't. He didn't drink regularly, but he struggled to, like, you know, once the off switch was on, he just loved having a good night out kind of thing. But knew it wasn't beneficial for him, so he made that decision. But after it, I noticed that he had a lot of anger, that he needed to have a place to go. And he pushed it down. And there was this one time where I remember he expressed himself, it wasn't at me, but he expressed anger, right? And I called up my friend, Binny Dansby, who is the wisest person I know. She's in her mid-80s. And I called her and just said, Craig just did this. And I expected her to say, oh, how terrible. And she said to me something that redefined my understanding of anger. And she said, how wonderful that he feels safe enough to express that and not keep it bottled up. Beautiful. That is so beautiful.